2024 was the year AnewZ was born, and what a year it's been for news and analysis. Catastrophic climate impact, elections in 60 countries with more than 3.5 billion voters taking to the polls, continued conflicts, devastating violence, but also the hope brought by new presidents, new technologies, and new commitments to collective action at events like COP29. Well, let's reflect on the most momentous moments of 2024 and look ahead to what 2025 has in store.
No single moment defines a year, but each of them can say a lot about us and what we did with the time we were given. A historic number of people headed to the polls and to the streets, and yet more leaders are pursuing their agendas through military means. 2024 has been a year of relentless conflicts, devastating violence, humanitarian crisis, and scars of war. This year, the Ukraine-Russia war passed its 1,000th day, and the battlefield situation has worsened significantly for both sides. Ukraine faced both manpower and ammunition shortages, and foreign aid often arrived too little, too late. May 2024, Russian forces crossed the international border to the north of Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv. Several villages were seized and thousands of civilians fled. It marked one of the most significant Russian ground assaults since the start of the war. The Russian push took place at the end of a 4-month period when the US was not supplying weapons to Ukraine due to a stalemate in the US Congress.
We need funding. We are ready to quickly produce everything that will help us bring this war to an end, namely by putting decisive pressure on Russia for real peace.
The issue was finally resolved with the US passing a $61 billion aid package to provide missiles, artillery, and air defense systems to the Ukrainian military. The boost resulted in a surprise attack launched across the border by Ukrainian troops, advancing up to 18 miles into the Russian region. Almost 200,000 people were evacuated from those areas along the borders by the Russian government. Ukraine's top commander claimed to control more than 1,200 square meters of Russian territories and 93 villages. The regions of Kursk and Belgorod have both declared a state of emergency. Some of those territories have since been regained by Russia, but Ukraine still has troops in the Kursk region. At the same time, Moscow began mobilizing North Korean soldiers to support its military operations in Ukraine. The arrival of North Korean troops was cited by US officials as a reason for President Joe Biden to give the green light for Ukraine to use American-made long-range weapons to strike into internationally recognized Russian territories. The potential consequences of such a move have taken the Russian-Ukraine war into uncharted territory.
Если это решение будет принято, это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине.
Burdened by the events of October 7, 2023, this year was marked by an escalation of armed conflicts across the Middle East. While war continued to rage in the Gaza Strip, Israel expanded operations into neighboring Lebanon to target Hamas ally Hezbollah, whose militants have fired hundreds of rockets into Israel. It was also in the first semester of 2024 that Iran launched its first ever direct attack on Israeli soil, firing more than 300 drones and missiles at Israeli territory. Several efforts to reach a diplomatic solution took place throughout the year, including US President Joe Biden calling on Hamas to accept a ceasefire proposal supported by the UN Security Council. But both sides failed to reach an agreement. Meanwhile, Israel launched its ground offensive of the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Israel took control of the so-called Philadelphia Corridor, a buffer zone stretching some 14 kilometers along the Egyptian border of the Gaza Strip. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced as a result of this offensive. that Iran launched an unprecedented drone and missile attack on Israel. Most missiles were shot down, and Israel responded with airstrikes targeting several military sites, including ballistic missiles and infrastructure central to Iran's nuclear program. The second half of the year started with the worst attack against Israeli civilians since October 7, 2023. A rocket fired from Lebanon into Israeli-occupied Golan Heights in Syria kills 12 people and wounds 19 more in the town of Majal Shams. From September onwards, Israel stepped up its military operations in northern and central Gaza to prevent Hamas fighters from regrouping. And on October 17, Hamas military chief Yahya Sinwar and the mastermind of the October 7th attacks was killed by Israeli soldiers on patrol in Rafah. Fighting two wars simultaneously, it was also in September that the fighting expanded into Lebanon. Hezbollah launches a significant attack on Israel, employing drones and hundreds of rockets. Over 2 days, thousands of pages and walkie-talkies believed to belong to members of Hezbollah exploded in Lebanon and Syria, killing at least 37 people and wounding thousands more. Israeli aircraft and drones strike Hezbollah strongholds in southern Lebanon. Hassan Nasrallah, leader of Hezbollah for more than 3 decades, is killed in the strikes. His death is confirmed by Hezbollah the next day. As the year ends, tens of thousands of Israeli, Palestinian and Lebanese nationals have faced internal displacement. 500 journalists, media professionals and aid workers have been killed, and more than 49,000 people have died as a result of these conflicts. More than 200 people were taken hostage in the Hamas-led attacks of October 7, 2023. As of December 2024, it is believed that 96 people are still alive and in captivity. In Syria, large-scale offensives were absent for most of the year. But on November 27, 2024, an armed anti-government group began to work its way from the northern part of the country to the south, towards Damascus. It only took 12 days for the rebel forces to reach the Syrian capital and overthrow Bashar al-Assad, putting an end to the brutal Assad rule. Aleppo was the first city to fall into the hands of the rebel group, who took control of 15 villages in one day. By December 5th, the insurgent group gained control of the city of Hama, and the next day, the rebel forces moved towards the city of Homs, a gateway to Damascus. Less than 24 hours later, Homs fell under the rebel control after government forces abandoned it. The mayor of an Iraqi border town says 2,000 Syrian soldiers crossed into Iraqi to seek refuge from the rebels. By December 8th, Damascus also fell. Reports began to surface of Bashar al-Assad fleeing the country, and the rebel groups took to the state media to announce its victory over the government forces. One of the strongest images of the year is Syrian civilians entering the Assad summer resort and seeing for the first time another side of their own country.
I can't explain how this is. It's enjoyable. I think I feel freedom for the first time in my life.
Rebuilding, revolution, restore, renewal. These are the words and the verbs that outline some of the most significant and memorable stories of 2024. As Syrians gear up to rebuild their nation, 2024 celebrated the restoration of the Notre Dame Cathedral. We saw Wegovy revolutionizing the way people rebuild their bodies and their self-perspective. We followed the continuing rejuvenation of space exploration, and from P. Diddy to Taylor Swift, pop culture icons renew our perception of the times we live in. After more than 5 years of restoration, the Notre Dame Cathedral has officially reopened to visitors in December. The nearly 900-year-old landmark, damaged by fire in 2019, has been restored to its former splendor thanks to the work of over 2,000 craftsmen and financial support from several countries. The reopening was achieved ahead of schedule, defying the projections that predicted it would take up to a decade. At this point, there's little doubt that you have heard about these weight loss medications that have taken the world by storm. Originally designed to tackle diabetes, drugs such as Ozempic and Wegovy have revolutionized weight loss, with 1 in 8 adults using weight management medicine around the world. Wegovy became the first FDA-approved weight reduction medicine, with quarterly sales increasing more than 8-fold within only 1 year, selling $2.92 million in the first 2 quarters this year.
That was British police came into the...
Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, was freed in June after striking a deal. Assange pleaded guilty to violating U.S. espionage laws and said in his first public statement since his release from prison that he, quote, chose freedom over unrealizable justice so he could end a 14-year legal battle that included over 5 years in a British high-security prison and 7 years in asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
I want to be totally clear. I am not free today because the system worked. I am free today after years of incarceration because I pled guilty to journalism.
In June, Boeing's Starliner was launched, and a week later, its capsules landed back on the New Mexico desert successfully, without its crew. What was supposed to be an 8th-day mission became an 8-month stay in space for astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. Starliner experienced issues with a set of thrusters and helium leaks in its propulsion system, and NASA decided that it would not be safe for the 2 astronauts to return to Earth on the spacecraft.
Out all of the lines that are basically pushing all of that propellant. We are starting to
Less than 3 months later, SpaceX, designed by Elon Musk, launched its most ambitious Starship test flight yet. In an impressive maneuver, the 233-foot, 71-meter rocket booster was successfully caught midair with a pair of massive metal pincers SpaceX calls chopsticks. Starship is the most powerful rocket system ever constructed and could one day be used to carry humans to the moon, even to Mars. The connection? Boeing's Starliner's astronauts Wilmore and Williams will return to Earth in February 2025 in a SpaceX capsule.
Smoked turkey. It's going to be delicious.
Less than 2 years ago, music mogul Sean P. Diddy Combs celebrated 30 years in the music industry, 3 decades in which he created his own entertainment empire and changed the sound of hip-hop, both as a recording artist and as a producer for Jennifer Lopez, Mariah Carey, and the Notorious B.I.G., to name a few.
It doesn't kill you, only makes you stronger.
Fast forward to 2024, and his legacy is now redefined by over 300 lawsuits and charges of sexual misconduct, sex trafficking, conspiracy, and racketeering.
I hit rock bottom.
The man who helped create the soundtrack of an entire generation is the following generation's portrait of abuse, cruelty, and violence. On the complete opposite side of pop culture headlines, superstar Taylor Swift has had an extraordinary year. She won a record-setting 4th Grammy Award for Album of the Year. But it was her earth-shaking Eras tour that showed Taylor Swift's far-reaching influence beyond just music and her undeniable power to impact economies around the world. Her tour has become the highest-grossing tour in the history of music, earning $2.2 billion by its final show in December, which made some world leaders openly request Swift to bring her tour to their countries. In Melbourne, Australia, Swift's performances contributed to over $766 million to the local economy, and her London concerts generated around $380 million. With a net worth estimated at $1.6 billion, Swift became the first musician to become a billionaire solely based on the value of songs and performances.
2024 was a huge year for sport, welcoming the return of the Olympic Games, this time in Paris, which hosted the event for the first time since 1924. From a very peculiar but undoubtedly historic and unique opening ceremony, eliciting mixed reactions worldwide, to new world records attained, Paris 2024, on the whole, felt like a return to normality after the COVID-affected Ghost Games of Tokyo. But the Games were not without their controversy, marked by heated debates over gender eligibility in women's sport, calls for political boycotts, and concerns about the pollution in the River Seine. Also in sport, Euro 2024, the 17th quadrennial European Football Championship, saw Spain claim the glory, becoming the most successful nation in the history of the competition, with a total of 4 wins since its inception in 1960. In what was a pulsating dramatic final in Berlin, the Spanish national team, known as La Roja, defeated England, forcing the latter to continue their search for an elusive international trophy, a first one since 1966.
The Paris Olympics began with an opening ceremony which was daring, dazzling and controversial. Held outside of a stadium for the first time in the history of the Summer Olympic Games, with thousands of athletes sailing along the River Seine, past performers on bridges and rooftops, and spectators lining the banks of Paris's main waterway, the ceremony transformed the French capital into a giant open-air theatre. Against the backdrop of lashing rain and major railway network disruptions, Paris managed to pull off an Olympic first, with the proceedings culminating in the lighting of a cauldron shaped like a hot air balloon that rose high into the sky. The contest itself, breakdancing made its debut, making it the first dance sport to appear in Summer Olympic history. Elsewhere, Rebecca Andrade became the first Brazilian gymnast to medal at the Olympics and the most decorated Brazilian and Latin American gymnast of all time. As for the Paralympics, the tournament featured a record number of female competitors and more medal events for women than ever before. The US and China were the tournament's biggest winners, topping the medal tables at number 1 and 2, respectively. However, the highs of this summer's events were not without their lows, with a gender row over women's boxing gold medalists Imane Khalif and Lin Yu-ting dominating headlines. Russia was absent from the Summer Games for the first time since 1984 due to International Olympic Committee's sanctions in connection with the situation in Ukraine. Critics of the Gaza conflict asked why this same treatment was not extended to Israel. Even the TV coverage of the opening ceremony itself was not immune to political sensibilities. Azerbaijan sent a letter to the International Olympic Committee to protest what it regarded as discriminatory language employed against itself by a correspondent of France 2, a French public national television, made during the parade of Azerbaijani and Armenian athletes, arguing that such comments contradicted the spirit of the Olympic Games. In response, the IOC apologized for the words used by the reporter, stating that they're not in line with the Olympic principles and values. Paris 2024 was also marked with strike actions, worker protests, safety concerns and some other issues. Yet its place in the history of the Olympic Games is firmly entrenched. Euro 2024, hosted in Germany, was another major sporting event of the year, which saw Spain achieve a gargantuan success of unprecedented scope, which will go down in the annals of the game's history. Defeating the defending European champions, the Italian national team, in the group stage, Spain was one of the key favourites from the outset of the tournament. On the way to the final in Berlin, La Roja managed to prevail over some of the strongest teams featuring in the competition, such as Germany and France, eventually defeating England in the last defining match held at the Olympic Stadium in the German capital.
2024 has ushered in a period of significant political upheaval and crisis, both in Europe and beyond, with many nations grappling with deepening internal struggles. In the South Caucasus, Georgia is facing a political crisis as tensions between the ruling party and opposition intensify, threatening its EU integration aspirations, aims growing economic hardships and social unrest. This mirrors a broader instability in Europe, where several key countries are experiencing leadership challenges and political instability. In France, President Emmanuel Macron's second term is overshadowed by economic difficulties, social protests, and a controversial pension reform, while a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Michel Barnier's further deepened the crisis. Similarly, in Germany, Chancellor Scholz's government collapsed after a failed confidence vote, raising the prospect of snap elections and deepening political uncertainty in Europe's largest economy. The United Kingdom has been rocked by political turbulence following the resignation of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, leading to a shift in leadership under Keir Starmer and signaling potential changes in the Conservative Party's direction. Across the Atlantic, Canada is not immune to the global wave of political instability. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government has faced mounting criticism with the resignation of a top cabinet minister over a dispute about how to manage US President-elect Donald Trump's tariff threats. This crisis, compounded by shifting global alliances, signal a pivotal moment in international politics, as nations across Europe and beyond face growing instability and leadership uncertainty. South Korea plunged into a severe political crisis marked by widespread protests, a military crackdown, and calls for President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. Earlier, Yoon's government declared martial law, citing the need to protect the country from North Korean communist forces and anti-state forces, and to rebuild and protect South Korea from falling into ruin. This is the first time martial law has been declared since 1980. The decision to impose the law triggered backlash from human rights groups and political opponents, accusing the government of authoritarian overreach. Members of parliament in Seoul voted to impeach the president. As the Constitutional Court deliberated on President Yoon's impeachment, international attention remained focused on the crisis and South Korea's ability to manage both domestic unrest and foreign relations. In 2024, Georgia faced a deepening political crisis marked by escalating tensions between the ruling Georgian Dream Party and opposition groups. On November 28, the Prime Minister announced that in response to alleged European political interference and extortion these EU funds, Georgia will suspend its EU accession talks until 2028, although it would continue working toward EU membership by 2030. The protests intensified following the presidential election. In return, the EU agreed to suspend visa-free travel for Georgian diplomats. Some European countries imposed sanctions on Georgian officials over protest suppression. Several African countries, including Ghana and Namibia, faced political turmoil marked by protest and election disputes. In Ghana, widespread anger over economic challenges and corruption led to demonstrations against the ruling New Patriotic Party, while opposition parties criticized the government's handling of the economy. In Namibia, rising discontent over corruption within the ruling SWAPO party fueled calls for political transparency and reform. Similar unrest was seen in countries like Uganda, Kenya, and Sudan, where frustrations over election outcomes, economic inequality, and authoritarian governance sparked widespread protest and demands for change. In a move that has further intensified political tensions, former French Prime Minister Michel Barnier invoked Article 49.3 of the Constitution to push through controversial draft budget measures without parliamentary approval. This decision has significantly raised the stakes, effectively ensuring a no-confidence vote on December 4. French lawmakers approved a no-confidence motion against his government, plunging the European Union's second-largest economy into a deeper crisis that jeopardized its ability to pass laws and address a substantial budget deficit. Macron's key ally, newly appointed Prime Minister François Bayrou, remains influential but is navigating a tricky political terrain as the president's support erodes. With Macron's future uncertain and no clear successor emerging, France finds itself at a crossroads with increasing polarization and a fractured political climate. In 2024, a new prime minister was also appointed in the United Kingdom amid ongoing political and economic challenges. Following the resignation of Rishi Sunak, the Conservative Party chose a new leader, Keir Starmer, signaling a shift in both party dynamics and national direction. Starmer, who had steered Labour back to the centre-left, focused on stabilizing the economy, addressing the cost of living crisis and tackling public sector strikes. His government worked to reform the NHS, invest in green infrastructure and navigate the complexities of post-Brexit trade relations, particularly with the EU. Starmer's leadership was tested by internal party divisions, especially from the left, and ongoing debates over fiscal policy and public sector wages. As he attempted to balance economic recovery with social justice priorities, his administration faced significant challenges in uniting a divided country while managing the UK's long-term post-Brexit issues. Germany, Europe's largest economy, is heading for snap elections after Chancellor Olaf Scholz lost a confidence vote in November, following months of instability in his coalition. The vote, which Scholz suggested could lead to early elections, saw 394 votes against him, 207 in favor and 116 abstentions. The collapse of his government, triggered by a budget dispute, has sparked political uncertainty, undermining Germany's leadership on key European issues like economic recovery and energy security amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. The Trudeau administration is also feeling the heat.
Like most families, sometimes we have fights around the holidays.
Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland stepped down from her role just before she was to deliver the nation's fall fiscal update, indicating a massive deficit. Now calls are growing for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to also resign.
The finance minister resigns, the prime minister hides all day and then has to beg his MPs not to fire him. But the worst news, buried underneath it all, was a devastating gut punch to Canadian taxpayers. A $62 billion deficit smashing through the already insane $40 billion guardrail. Canada is a serious G7 NATO partner staring down the threat of 25% tariffs. We deserve a strong leader with a new mandate.
Trump wasted no time blasting Freeland after her resignation. In a social media post, he said her behavior was totally toxic and not at all conducive to making deals. He also joked that Canada should become the 51st state of the U.S.
There's no doubt Donald Trump is already influencing geopolitics well before his return to the White House in January. What an extraordinary year for a man who survived an assassination attempt, out-debated U.S. President Joe Biden, and handily defeated Kamala Harris. His victory is arguably the biggest political comeback in U.S. history. Trump entered the 2024 campaign with 90 felony charges looming due to 4 indictments.
The president has to have immunity. And the other thing is I did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong.
He's the first former U.S. president to be convicted of a crime with 34 felony counts. The election was a huge game changer. The Republicans won back full control of the U.S. government.
This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have.
getting a majority in the Senate and the House. And the trifecta will give the president-elect significant authority to enact his agenda for the economy, immigration, and other key issues.
We will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to the United States of America in full, quickly, and without question. I'm not going to stand for it. So to the officials of Panama, please be guided accordingly.
As we look at the growing strain on our planet, this year has brought the climate crisis into sharp focus. Devastating heat waves, catastrophic storms, and rising seas have reshaped lives across the globe. Let's take a closer look at how 2024 has been defined by these escalating challenges.
This year was officially the hottest on record, with global temperatures rising approximately 1.4 Celsius above late 19th century levels. Prolonged heat waves swept across continents, intensifying droughts, sparking wildfires, and claiming thousands of lives, particularly among the elderly and vulnerable populations. In July, Typhoon Yagi tore through Pacific coastlines, driven by unusually warm ocean waters. The storm caused over €3 billion in damages, displaced tens of thousands, and led to the deaths of at least 120 people across the region. Meanwhile, in Spain, Valencia experienced catastrophic flooding. More than 300 millimeters of rain fell in just 48 hours, turning streets into raging rivers and killing dozens as homes and vehicles were swept away. Rescue teams worked tirelessly, but the destruction underscored the vulnerability of urban centers to sudden, extreme rainfall. Later in the year, Hurricane Milton devastated Florida's west coast. Strengthening to a Category 5 hurricane, Milton struck with sustained winds of 180 miles per hour, leaving millions without power and causing the deaths of at least 280 people. Rising sea levels also pose significant threats, particularly to low-lying regions. The French island of Mayotte in the Mozambique Channel experienced intensified storm surge and coastal erosion, forcing partial evacuations and leaving hundreds stranded without access to clean water. Compounding Mayotte's woes, Cyclone Chido struck in December, causing fuel shortages and long queues at petrol stations. Tempests flared as residents waited through the night for essential supplies, reflecting the deepening strain caused by extreme weather events.
This year has shown us the devastating cost of inaction. But amidst the turmoil, the world has also come together in unprecedented ways to tackle the climate crisis. At the COP29 summit, leaders and experts gathered with a shared mission to turn ambition into action and pave the way for a more sustainable future.
Distinguished Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to Azerbaijan.
COP29, the 29th UN Climate Change Conference, began on 11 November 2024 in Baku, Azerbaijan, and extended beyond its planned end date of 22 November. It gathered representatives from nearly 200 countries and over 56,000 participants, including world leaders, climate scientists, activists and business leaders to address the planet's most pressing crisis. The voices of indigenous communities and small island states resonated throughout the summit. Leaders from vulnerable nations described COP29 as their last chance for survival, warning of irreversible damage if global action fails. Meanwhile, youth activists and NGOs amplified calls for accountability, demanding tangible and measurable outcomes. Despite progress, deep division surfaced during negotiations. Developer nations criticized the delay in climate finance commitments and questioned the accountability of wealthier countries.
But we have a right as countries to choose if we're going to take this or not. And I'm saying that we do not accept this.
However, the summit's extended hours also signaled a growing determination among delegates to find common ground. Key agreements emerged after intense deliberations. Negotiators agreed to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030 and pushed for the phase down of fossil fuels, though binding deadlines remained elusive. At the final hour, COP29 delivered a record $300 billion annual climate finance package aiming to bridge the funding gap for developing nations and address the escalating climate crisis.
It has been a difficult journey, but we've delivered a deal.
The conference ended with a powerful message. While the challenges are immense, the resolve to act is stronger than ever. From Baku to the world, COP29 has set the stage for a future where nations rise together to meet the defining challenge of our time.
29th session of the COP, 19th session of the CMP and 6th session of the CMA closed.
In the final days of 2024, tragic airline disaster struck, beginning with the Azerbaijan Airlines crash on December 25. Within just 10 days, multiple lives were lost in heartbreaking events. Our deepest condolences go out to those who lost their lives and to all affected by these tragedies.
On 25 December 2024, Azerbaijan Airlines flight J28243 tragically crashed near Aktau airport during its journey from Baku to Grozny. The accident claimed 38 lives, including 3 crew members, while 29 passengers survived. Their survival was credited to the pilot's remarkable professionalism and the swift support of Aktau residents who rushed to hospitals to donate blood for the injured. Kazakh media highlighted the community's extensive efforts to support survivors in the aftermath of the tragedy. Kazakhstan's government responded promptly. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev personally oversaw the emergency response, ensuring swift mobilization of resources to support the survivors and manage the aftermath, efforts which Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev would later describe as a sign of true friendship and brotherhood. Workers from the Mangistau Regional Electric Power Company, who were near the crash site, were the first to provide aid, pulling the injured from the wreckage. Initial reports from Russian sources suggested the crash was caused by a bird strike, later followed by claims of fog-related diversions. However, investigations revealed evidence of external physical interference. Sharpnel tracks indicated the aircraft was hit by a Panzer S-1 air defense system, and its GPS system was reportedly paralyzed during the flight. Russian state media offered conflicting theories, but the aircraft's manufacturer confirmed there were no technical issues. Aviation experts widely agreed that the plane was downed by a Russian Panzer S-1 system based on the damage observed on the wreckage. Russian President Vladimir Putin later apologized to President Ilham Aliyev in a phone call, expressing condolences to the victims' families and wishing a swift recovery for the injured. President Aliyev acknowledged the condolences but stated that 2 additional conditions must be met.
Secondly, it must acknowledge its guilt. Thirdly, those responsible must be punished, brought to criminal responsibility, and compensation must be paid to the Azerbaijani state, to the injured passengers and crew members. These are our conditions.
Global leaders and organizations extended their condolences, expressing solidarity with Azerbaijan in the wake of the tragedy. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan also expressed his sympathies. In recognition of their sacrifice, the title of National Hero of Azerbaijan was posthumously awarded to Kishniakin Igor Ivanovich, Kalyaninov Alexander Georgievich, and Aliyeva Hokuma. Additionally, the first-degree Bravery Order was awarded to Asadov Zulfigar and Rahimli Aydam for their exceptional bravery and dedication.
It is our immense privilege to bring you news and analysis from around the world. We know that you have a choice, and the job of delivering fact-based journalism is a responsibility we take seriously and personally. So whether you watch on TV, YouTube, or any one of our social media platforms, we want to thank you for choosing AnewZ. And from our entire team here in Baku and around the world, we wish you a very happy New Year.